This is A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's begin with the top headlines making news around the world. U.S. President Donald Trump says talks with Iran will take place in Qatar tomorrow. Venezuela earthquake rescue teams search for survivors as death toll mounts. And Europe's heatwave is linked to 1,300 deaths, WHO says, as Germany records high breaking temperatures. The United States and Iran have agreed to pause mutual attacks for now and say they will meet in Qatar tomorrow. It comes as tensions over the Strait of Hormuz and the security of shipping in the waterway remain in focus. Let's go to this report for the latest.
Posting on his social media, U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that the United States and Iran are set to hold talks in Doha on Tuesday. The meeting had originally been planned for Switzerland and was expected to focus on Iran's nuclear program. But renewed tensions in the Strait of Hormuz prompted the talks to move to Qatar, with the focus shifting to shipping security. During negotiations in Switzerland a week ago, the two sides agreed to establish a hotline between the US military and Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to coordinate traffic in the strategic waterway. However, Axios reported that the hotline was still not operational as of Saturday. The diplomatic push follows a new round of military exchanges. The United States carried out strikes on Iranian targets on Friday and Saturday, citing what it called continued Iranian aggression against commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran responded by striking US military positions in the region.
French President Emmanuel Macron has hosted Oman's Sultan and Prime Minister Haytham bin Tariq Al Said in Paris for high-level talks. During the talks, the two sides discussed regional tensions in the Middle East, including efforts to reduce escalation and secure navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. As part of the meeting, the leaders also signed agreements on education, culture, energy, and transport, strengthening bilateral ties. A key project is the Muscat Metro, aimed at modernizing transport in Oman's capital and supporting long-term economic diversification. Israel says it has destroyed a Hezbollah underground facility in southern Lebanon, saying it contained hundreds of weapons and launchers. Israel's military released a video, it says, shows explosions in the village of Majdal Zone in southern Lebanon. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israeli forces destroyed what they described as a 200-meter underground site that they say was used by Hezbollah. According to the statement, the United States was informed before the operation. Rescue efforts are continuing in Venezuela as emergency teams race against time to find survivors beneath collapsed buildings. International teams have joined the operation, while thousands of families are still waiting for news of missing relatives. Here is the latest from the disaster zone.
Search and rescue operations continue in Venezuela after two powerful earthquakes struck on the 24th of June. Interim President Delcy Rodriguez said 33 more people were pulled alive from the rubble over the weekend. However, the fate of tens of thousands of people remains unknown. Officials say the death toll has now reached nearly 1,500. The magnitude 7.2 and 7.5 earthquakes struck just 39 seconds apart, destroying nearly 800 buildings and trapping thousands of people. La Guaira has suffered the worst damage. Drone footage released on Sunday showed dozens of buildings reduced to rubble in the coastal state, about 40 kilometers north of Caracas. Families are continuing to search for missing relatives by hand. Many say they can hear voices beneath the debris, but there is not enough heavy machinery to lift the concrete. Thousands of people are still unable to return home. Many are sleeping in their cars, while others are staying in temporary shelters, including a golf course in Carabaleda that has been turned into a field hospital and humanitarian aid centre. The José María Vargas Sports Complex in La Guaira is also being used as an emergency response centre. The country's largest oil refinery has resumed operations and electricity has been restored to 75% of La Guaira. Meanwhile, authorities also say that water services are back to 68% and around 90% of the roads are now open. International support continues to grow. Rescue teams from Mexico, Spain, Qatar, the United States and the United Kingdom have joined the operation. The United Nations says there are 39 international search and rescue teams with around 2,000 rescuers, 111 search dogs, medical teams and specialised micro-drones are now working in Venezuela. The U.S Geological Survey estimates that the final death toll could exceed 10,000. If confirmed, the disaster would rank among the deadliest earthquakes in Latin America over the past century.
As Venezuela continues to assess the damage from last week's earthquakes, heavy rains have triggered new flooding in the western state of Portuguesa. Several areas were flooded after a river overflowed, 2 schools were affected, and local officials reported around 350 people impacted. Authorities say response teams are assessing the damage and monitoring further risks from heavy rain. The Kremlin has rejected new proposals for a localized ceasefire in Ukraine, maintaining that its military campaign will press forward. The political deadlock unfolds amid fresh territorial escalations and deadly strikes affecting civilian areas on both sides.
Fresh strikes have caused multiple civilian casualties in southeastern Ukraine. In Dnipro, a Russian missile hit a local business, killing 5 people and wounding nearly 30. A fatal drone attack was also reported on a minibus in Zaporizhia. On the battlefield, Moscow claims advances in the Lyman and Konstantinivka directions, alongside northern operations in Sumy and Vovchansk to establish a security buffer. Conversely, Kiev's general staff reported responding with overnight long-range drone strikes targeting 2 Russian oil refineries and an ammunition depot. Amid the combat, Russian President Vladimir Putin disclosed that Kiev had proposed a mutual halt to long-range strikes and a localized freeze, an initiative Moscow dismissed.
There is a request to halt hostilities, at least briefly, along the line of contact. But there are also new proposals to stop strikes deep into each other's territory. It is clear why this proposal is being made, because our retaliatory strikes deep into Ukrainian territory are far more powerful.
Moscow maintains peace requires Ukraine to cede 4 claimed regions and drop its NATO bid, while Putin offered to resume strategic talks based on the 2025 Spirit of Anchorage. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio rejected the claim, stating no binding agreement was ever finalized. Kiev rejects these terms. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha declared the Anchorage format dead, warning any peace framework designed without Ukraine will fail. Concurrently, President Volodymyr Zelensky pushed for faster EU membership talks.
Ukraine has already come a long way toward the European Union, and much has been built on this foundation. Negotiations on our membership have already begun. Clusters are already being opened.
On Monday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov responded to the international pushback, stating Moscow's structural conditions remain entirely unchanged and well known to all negotiating parties.
To help us unpack these latest developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we're joined by Ines Burrell, geopolitical analyst who speaks to us from Turkey, UK. Ms. Burrell, welcome to the program and thank you very much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me.
Ms. Burrell, what message was President Putin sending by publicly rejecting Ukraine's proposal to halt long-range strikes? Does this suggest Moscow sees no realistic prospect for negotiations in the near term?
Moscow has never seen realistic way to negotiate this. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Moscow has never
rejected proposals to halt a long-range missile attack.
They have never seen a realistic way to negotiate this conflict, because if any negotiations were possible, they would not have started this war. I don't think you can hear me.
I'm asking again, what message was President Putin sending by publicly rejecting Ukraine's proposal to hold long-range strikes? And does this suggest Moscow sees no realistic prospect for negotiations in the near term?
They do not intend to negotiate now or in future. They can only be brought to negotiation table by force, but they do not believe that it is possible at this time. They intend, and that is what Putin demonstrated, they intend to continue with their goals and continue trying to annex most of the occupy most of the territories that they have annexed before.
So Putin argued Ukraine made the proposal because it's under military pressure. How credible is that assessment?
At this time, it's very hard to believe that it's anywhere near truth, because Ukraine has been in this fight for 4.5 years now. Their situation is now improving considerably because there has been a recent break in hostilities. Ukraine has gained upper hand thanks to their use of mid-range drones. They are capable of cutting off logistics on far away from front lines, which means that Russian troops have very poor supply lines. Putin either doesn't know it or he's trying to bluff his way through it. It is entirely possible that his people do not tell him everything. Obviously, most of what he knows, he's not going to tell wider public. However, at the moment, it starts to look like the reality of what Russian people are seeing is wildly different from what Putin is reporting. And that presents a problem because people can believe that things are going well only when they can see that they are roughly going well. But when they themselves start lacking any fuel, when they can see explosions and when they have to hide from bombs themselves, they understand that things are not going well. So at the moment, Putin is still trying to pretend that everything is going according to plan, and that is his message.
So Ukraine continues to strike Russian oil refineries with long-range drones. How significant are these attacks strategically and economically?
Well, this seems to be a long-term strategy, plans for which were put in place quite a while ago. It just so happens that right now they're all coming to fruition, because essentially at the beginning of the war, when Ukraine was mostly reliant on the partners' weapons, Ukraine made the conscious decision to invest into drone technology to become more independent. And it took them a while, but at the moment they're producing enough drones and they're varied enough for Ukraine to be able to hit mostly where they want within Russia and not depend on what their partners say. If they, for example, do not want any fuel restrictions around Europe or similar things, Ukraine is utilizing all their drone warfare abilities right now, and it is also affecting Russian budget, although it is because oil prices were high due to Strait of Hormuz conflict. Russia had a chance to improve its financial situation, but it didn't really have too much time for it, so it couldn't utilize all that situation. As a result, we can see the oil prices are going down considerably now. They have basically returned to what they were just before the conflict started in February. And their budget is not going to receive the higher taxes from the oil production. At the same time, their own oil refineries are being put out of business regularly by Ukrainian drones. The result is that they don't have enough oil supplies, or rather they have oil supplies which they can't shift. They don't have enough fuel, and they might have to import fuel from abroad, and it's going to cost them a lot of money at the time when their income from oil imports is already shrinking.
So could continued attacks on energy facilities have wider consequences for global energy markets, particularly if Russian exports are disrupted?
Probably not, because according to the, put it this way, Russia is already producing a lot less oil than it is allowed according to OPEC rules. They cannot produce as much oil as they should be able to. Also, it looks like we will have Iranian oil on the market now. So several other countries have also increased oil production, and the world seems to have coped rather well with the situation, all things considered. What Russia can offer is not that much, and it can be easily cut out of equation, especially considering the fact that America is quite happily taking the first place in oil importers list. They are the top oil, exporters. They are the top oil exporter in the world at the moment. They are happy about it, although obviously people at the pumps are not, but businesses, oil producers they like the situation. So cutting out Russia as a potential competitor and also possibly putting them in a worse economic situation is a very real avenue of action, and that's what is going to probably happen.
So, Ms. Beryl, what role are Western military assistance and sanctions likely to play in shaping the next phase of the conflict?
Well, sanctions and military assistance are two different things. As we have seen, sanctions have a potential of causing harm to Russia, but they have to be implemented correctly. If nobody is making sure, nobody is enforcing them properly, then obviously it doesn't matter whether there are any sanctions. So far, what we have seen is that some sanctions work and some sanctions don't. Like, for example, the ill-fated oil price ceiling never really worked properly. At the same time, as we can see what Ukraine does, they call it their long-range sanctions when they sanction some oil refineries out of business completely. So that brings us to military help from partner states, which at this time is no longer as the same as it used to be before. Previously, there were loads of weapons that Ukraine didn't produce, and it needed them from other countries. Now, with the development of drone warfare, they produce most of the drones they need themselves. Also, a lot of drones are produced in European countries, and they are produced by Ukraine in other countries. So those production places cannot be hit by Russian missiles, whereas Ukraine can hit Russian weapons production places in Russia. So by moving weapons production outside of Ukraine, Ukraine has been able to protect their weapons production lines. From what we see, the partners do not intend to stop help to Ukraine because everybody understands that Ukraine at the moment is protecting the rest of Europe. Because if Russia was allowed to walk through Ukraine, they would just continue walking. They wouldn't stop on their own.
Ines Beryl, thank you very much for your valuable insights and for joining us from Turkey. We greatly appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot. Afghanistan's government says Pakistan's overnight strikes in the east have killed dozens of civilians, including women and children. However, Pakistan says it targeted TTP militant hideouts near the border. For more details, we go to our correspondent Tamim Bahis in Kabul.
Afghanistan condemns the recent strikes by Pakistan after officials say several areas in the eastern provinces of Paktia and Kunar were hit late on Sunday night, killing civilians. According to Hamdullah Fitrat, the deputy spokesman of Afghanistan's government, at least 38 people were killed and 163 others injured so far. He says the casualties include women and children. Pakistan, however, says its operation was aimed at militant hideouts along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Pakistani officials confirm its security forces carried out a ground operation followed by airstrikes targeting Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan or TTP positions. Large quantities of weapons and ammunition were destroyed, according to Pakistan's Information Minister Ataullah Tarar on social media on Monday. Islamabad says 29 militants were killed and describes the action as a response to recent attacks inside Pakistan, including an assault on a paramilitary rangers facility in Karachi. Pakistan repeatedly says militants use Afghan soil to launch attacks across the border, accusing Kabul of harboring militants. An allegation Kabul denies, saying the militancy is Pakistan's internal problem. Tensions between the two neighbors remain high, with fears of further escalation along the frontier. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
We'll continue with the main stories of the day after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. A fatal shooting at a popular California entertainment hub has left one person dead and another critically injured. The incident occurred at San Jose's San Pedro Square, a prominent gathering spot currently hosting World Cup fan zones. While local venues were swiftly shuttered and cordoned off by a heavy police presence, officials confirmed no tournament matches were being screened at the time of the gunfire. 11 people, including the pilot and 10 skydivers, were killed when a small aircraft crashed shortly after takeoff in northeastern France. The incident occurred on Sunday in the town of Tomblain. Victims included 5 instructors and 5 first-time parachutists. It is the deadliest private plane accident in French history outside military and commercial flights. Forensic and medical teams have been deployed to assist families and examine the wreckage. A historic heat wave across Europe has linked to over 1,300 excess deaths since June the 21st, with France alone accounting for at least 1,000 of those fatalities. The World Health Organization warns that extreme conditions are shutting down schools and buckling power grids for 150 million people. As Italy, Germany and Poland register record temperatures above 40 degrees, the crisis has overwhelmed the regional healthcare systems. Relief is expected by nightfall as severe storms approach the continent. The French government has been accused of incompetence, inaction and unpreparedness by the opposition for its response to the heat wave, in which at least 1,000 excess deaths were reported. Ross Cullum reports.
Well, the heat wave that's been battering a lot of Europe has now passed through France. It's noticeably much cooler, it's noticeably much more comfortable, but the political heat is continuing to be applied by the opposition on the government. Multiple opposition parties accusing the government of Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu of inaction, of incompetence, of failing to prepare properly for the impacts of the heat wave. There are also growing calls across multiple sectors of society for an accelerated introduction of air conditioning, especially in care homes and in schools. Last week, hundreds of thousands of pupils had to sit their exams outside, with more time being allowed for each exam so children could take regular hydration breaks. Also, 1,000 excess deaths because of the heat wave, an additional 1,000 fatalities that would not have occurred had France not been hit with unseasonably high temperatures. Across the elderly demographic, but also young people, especially being caught up in the spate of drownings here in France. And we do know that there is another heat wave on the way, scheduled to arrive in the middle of July. And so the Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, will come under pressure now to ensure that there is a proper plan in place to deal with the next wave of heat here in France. Ross Cullen, A News, Paris.
UK lawmaker Andy Burnham set out his first major leadership pitch since entering the Labour race. In his first speech in Manchester, since returning to Westminster after winning a parliamentary seat, Burnham said stronger oversight was needed to improve outcomes and accountability in essential services. Our correspondent Zeynep Farizadeh reports from Manchester.
UK lawmaker Andy Burnham set out a new vision for Britain in his first major speech since launching his Labour leadership campaign, calling for power to be devolved away from Westminster and for living standards to be raised. Speaking in Manchester, Burnham said Britain needs a circuit breaker after years of political instability and stagnant living standards, arguing that Westminster hasn't been working for people for a very long time. He said Britain is one of the most over-centralized countries in the world, with Westminster and Whitehall in need of radical change. The centerpiece of his plan is the creation of a No 10 No's, a prime ministerial office based in Manchester, which is said will become the no center of a revived Britain, redistributing power and resources across the UK. Burnham said he wants to bring the Greater Manchester Way to Westminster, replacing political conflict with collaboration between government, businesses, communities and trade unions. He described the approach as Manchesterism, saying growth should be built from the bottom up, backed by investment in infrastructure, housing and good jobs. He also pledged what he described as the biggest council house building program since the post-war period, saying Britain has lost almost 1.5 million council homes since the 1980s, leaving similar numbers on housing waiting lists. Talking about cabinet appointments, Burnham said he would only make them if he becomes prime minister, but promised an inclusive team representing both the party and the country. Burnham is currently the only declared candidate to take over from Keir Starmer and could be made Prime Minister next month. Zeynep Farizadeh, News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Protests continued in Serbia in Kraljevo on Sunday, despite President Alexander Vucic's resignation announcement, with many remaining skeptical that his departure will bring real change. Vucic, who ruled Serbia for 12 years, faced a month of student-led demonstrations following a 2024 railway accident in Novi Sad that killed 16 people. The accident became a symbol of alleged government mismanagement and corruption, fueling the largest protests in the country. The Emerge Innovation Summit has arrived in Berlin, the third and final stop in a series of events ahead of the main summit in Baku later this year. The Berlin gathering is focused on connecting European markets with emerging opportunities in Azerbaijan, the Caucasus and Central Asia.
Guten Tag aus Berlin. We are here at the Emerge Innovation Summit now. The first panel session is going on right behind me now, so we do have to be a bit quiet. This is the third leg of a tour of summits that have spanned across Istanbul, Tashkent, and of course this is the European leg. So the emphasis here is on Europe and about building bridges between European markets and the emerging markets in Azerbaijan, in the Caucasus and in Central Asia. Now the panel behind me is discussing the opportunities that we have currently for this region to emerge as a partner with Europe. Previously, Europe's biggest partner in the region was Russia, but of course following the invasion of Ukraine, Russia has closed off. So there is big opportunities here for Caucasus, Central Asian countries to build partnerships with Europe, and that is the focus of this summit. Today we've been hearing about leadership, and we've also been hearing about why Berlin is a fitting host city for this, as it's so often and historically been at the intersection between East and West. Now we've been speaking to the organisers and attendees of this summit about their thoughts. Let's hear what they had to say.
So the region up till now has been not discovered, I want to say, although it's very rich in human potential, amazing tech skills, not so expensive, and then culturally not so far away, and it's very easy to integrate, culturally solutions and teams together. So we believe that now is the timing to build those bridges and let them work.
So I think maybe the overall key message that I'm taking away, not just from my talk, but from all of them, is that in this age of AI, of technology, of efficiency, being truly knowing yourself as a human and using that as a strength in how you relate to others is a key thing going forward.
This is Katie Wilson, Ilke Metiev and Nazrin Gazimova reporting for A News from Berlin in Germany.
South Korea is set to expand the country's chip-making power beyond the Seoul region. President Lee Jae-myung has unveiled a sweeping industrial strategy centered on semiconductors and artificial intelligence, with more than $576 billion in investment. The aim is to lock in global dominance and drive more balanced growth.
South Korea aims to narrow regional disparities and revive economies beyond the Seoul metropolitan area with a major investment drive for semiconductors and artificial intelligence. President Lee Jae-myung unveiled his industrial strategy on Monday with an investment of $576 billion to develop a new chip production base in the country's southwest. The move is part of Seoul's 3 mega projects initiative, covering semiconductors, AI data centers, and physical artificial intelligence, including robotics. The project aims to turn Gwangju and the Jeolla region into the country's second major semiconductor cluster, alongside existing hubs around Seoul and Pyeongtaek. Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix are expected to play a central role as Seoul pushes to strengthen its memory chip leadership and expand high-tech industry beyond the capital region. But South Korea's move is part of a much wider global race. Chips are tiny electronic components made from semiconductor materials, but their impact is enormous. They power everything from smartphones and electric vehicles to data centers, industrial robots, advanced weapons, and artificial intelligence. Modern chips can contain billions of transistors, some smaller than a virus, switching on and off billions of times per second. The AI boom has made the competition sharper because the most powerful systems depend on advanced processors and high-performance memory chips. The United States remains dominant in chip design, software tools, and core technology, while Taiwan leads in the most advanced contract manufacturing. South Korea is a global leader in memory chips, while China is investing heavily to reduce its reliance on foreign technology. Japan and the European Union are also trying to rebuild or expand domestic chip capacity, after supply chain shocks exposed dependence on a small number of producers. This has turned semiconductors into a geopolitical issue. Chips now shape trade policy, export controls, defense planning, and the rivalry between Washington and Beijing. Governments increasingly see chip supply chains as strategic assets, not just commercial industries. For South Korea, the new investment is therefore not only about growth, it is about securing a place in the next phase of global technological power.
China has added 20 Japanese entities to its export control list, citing concerns over Japan's remilitarization and nuclear ambitions. Beijing says the move is necessary to safeguard national security. Mahnur Maktoum has more from Beijing.
Chinese firms are now prevented from selling to 20 Japanese entities unless the companies have received prior approval, with the ministry stating that exports tied to Japanese military use would not be given the green light. China's Ministry of Commerce has made the move to its export control list, including Japan's National Institute for Defense Studies and several major industrial subsidiaries. The ministry said that the decision was made in accordance with China's export control law and relevant regulations aimed at safeguarding national security and fulfilling international non-proliferation obligations. Under the new measures, Chinese exporters are prohibited from supplying dual-use goods to the listed organizations, as well as overseas entities are also barred from transferring Chinese-origin dual-use items to them. The restrictions took effect immediately, while the ministry also put 20 other Japanese entities on a watch list for which it could not verify end users or final use of the dual-use items exported to them. Beijing described the action as targeted and limited in scope, saying that it would not affect normal economic trade exchanges between China and Japan, and that law-abiding Japanese entities have nothing to worry about. It's the latest step in a broader campaign that China launched earlier this year to restrict dual-use exports tied to Japan's defense sector, showing Beijing's continued use of export controls to safeguard its strategic interests. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
The Trump administration says temporary protected status was never intended to be permanent. Homeland Security Secretary is now urging migrants to seek permanent residence or prepare to return home. He says the government will provide a plane ticket and about $2,100 to help them resettle. The move follows a Supreme Court ruling that cleared the way for the administration to end protection for hundreds of thousands of Haitians and Syrians. And after the break, we'll continue with the main stories shaping the region. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. We now shift our focus to the region. Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze is in Astana today for a high-level visit that puts the spotlight on one of Georgia's most strategically important and often overlooked partnerships. The agenda spans trade, energy, and the transcontinental corridor that's reshaping how goods move between East and West. Nini Nikolashvili reports.
Irakli Kobakhidze touched down in Astana this morning, where he was greeted by Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev at the Independence Palace, followed by government-level talks with Prime Minister Olzas Bektenov, with ministers from both countries around the table. The relationship between Tbilisi and Astana has been growing steadily, and the figures back that up. Bilateral trade rose by 35% in the first 5 months of this year alone, and that growth has not happened by accident. It's been driven by a shared strategic interest. The Middle Corridor, the Trans-Caspian trade route linking China with Europe while bypassing Russia. Georgia and Kazakhstan are two of its most important hubs, and both governments have invested heavily in expanding these routes. Last year, Kazakhstan opened a new container terminal at Poti Port, its first infrastructure project on Georgian soil, as part of more than $600 million in Kazakh investment in Georgia. Energy ties run just as deep. Kazakh oil already flows west through the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, and there is growing momentum behind plans for a green energy corridor linking Central Asian renewable power to European markets via the Black Sea. If realized, it would further strengthen Georgia's role as a key transit hub. What makes today's visit particularly significant is the size and seniority of the delegation Kobakhidze has brought with him. Ministers responsible for foreign affairs, the economy, agriculture, and the environment are all taking part, effectively turning the visit into a working session between the two governments. That is not routine diplomacy. It reflects how central this partnership has become for Georgia at a time when Tbilisi is actively diversifying its economic relationships and looking east as well as west. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Trade relations between Uzbekistan and the United States have received another boost after both sides agreed on a package of measures aimed at expanding market access and strengthening investment cooperation. The announcement follows high-level trade talks in Tashkent as Uzbekistan continues its bid to join the World Trade Organization.
The United States says it will not introduce any additional tariffs on Uzbek exports beyond those already provided under U.S. legislation. And Uzbekistan says it will offer a favorable tariff regime for a broad range of American industrial and agricultural products. That's according to Uzbekistan's Special Representative on the World Trade Organization Affairs, Azizbek Urunov. The latest agreements come after Washington's Trade Representative Jameson Greer recently visited Tashkent, where he held talks with President Shavkat Mirziyoyev and senior government officials. Bilateral negotiations with the United States concluded in late 2024, after 14 months of discussions with Washington reaffirming its support for Uzbekistan's goal of completing the WTO accession process by the end of this year. The two sides also agreed to strengthen investment cooperation and continue negotiations on a broader trade and investment agreement expected to deepen economic ties between the two countries. The discussions build on growing economic cooperation between the two countries. Tashkent International Investment Forum, hosted 2 weeks ago, attracted more than 10,000 participants. Investment agreements worth a record $43 billion were signed, underscoring Uzbekistan's effort to attract foreign capital and expand international partnerships. It is Sivir Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Kazakhstan's proposed 6-month ban on wheat imports is open for public discussion until Wednesday as the government moves to support local producers. The draft order would restrict shipments by road, water and rail while allowing transit through Kazakhstan to continue. Some rail imports would still be permitted for selected farms, processors and licensed elevators, but the grain cannot be resold. Kazakhstan is also considering possible limits on beef exports. Russia is currently the only country exporting wheat to Kazakhstan. The decision by the Israeli government concerning the so-called Armenian genocide is a matter of serious concern, Azerbaijan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said in a statement. Baku stressed it was unacceptable to misrepresent the events of 1915 and turn a historical issue into a political decision. The statement added that such steps do not contribute to reconciliation or mutual understanding, but instead deepen existing divisions and undermine efforts to achieve lasting peace in the region. Azerbaijan called on the Israeli government to reconsider its decision. Baku also reaffirmed that it would continue to uphold historical truth, respect the principles of international law, and support efforts to promote lasting peace in the region. Uzbekistan is drafting legislation to restrict social media access for under 16-year-olds. Education officials argue that while absolute mobile phone bans remain unrealistic, tighter regulatory frameworks are essential to foster safer digital habits. The proposal, slated for public discussion, aligns Tashkent with a growing global trend toward youth-focused internet controls, following recent policy shifts in Australia, Norway and France. China and Belarus have pledged to deepen their strategic partnership following talks between Presidents Xi Jinping and Alexander Lukashenko in Beijing. Abu Hayat Jafarova reports from Beijing.
Chinese President Xi Jinping welcomed Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko to Beijing, describing China and Belarus as true friends and all-weather comprehensive strategic partners. Xi said bilateral ties have reached their strongest point in history, highlighting growing political trust, progress in Belt and Road cooperation, and successful coordination on international affairs. He also reaffirmed China's support for Belarus in safeguarding its sovereignty and pledged continued assistance for the country's development within China's capacity. President Lukashenko praised the practical cooperation between the two countries, saying it has made an important contribution to Belarus' economic and social development. He said Belarus is committed to expanding cooperation with China and strengthening coordination on regional and international issues, while also expressing support for China's global initiatives aimed at promoting peace, stability and development. Abu Hayat Jafarova, A News, Beijing, China.
Technology and trade took center stage at the 9th China-Eurasia Expo in Urumqi. International buyers are seeking closer partnerships with Chinese companies.
In Urumqi, the 9th China-Eurasia Expo is being used as a platform to turn technology showcases into business partnerships. The 5-day event, running from 25th to 29th June, has brought together participants from 49 countries, regions, and international organizations.
The possibility of China to make a lot of very good quality goods and in very short period of time. This is a very good skill in business.
More than 3,000 companies and institutions are attending, with buyers looking closely at Chinese developments in artificial intelligence, smart manufacturing, green energy, biomanufacturing, low-altitude aviation, and digital technology. More than 100 high-tech firms are displaying new products, from industrial drones and robotic systems to AI-powered smart bicycles and new energy transport solutions. Some Chinese companies say overseas orders are growing, including demand from Russia, Spain, and other European markets. The expo also highlights Xinjiang's role as a gateway between China and Eurasia. Organizers say the event is not only about exhibition stands, but about deeper trade links, cleaner industries, and stronger cross-border cooperation across Central Asia, Europe, and beyond.
This concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for your time and stay tuned to A News for more updates.